Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is perspective, particularly as it relates to our self-awareness and self-assessment. We talked about self-assessment yesterday, so we get to take it a step further today. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to just get present and be here together. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clear, crisp oxygen just flowing into your lungs and flooding your bloodstream and nourishing your cells and your organs and bringing vital life energy. And as you exhale, exhale any tension or stress. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose. Hold it. And this time imagine clear, sparkling, bright, brilliant light just flowing into your electrons and your molecules and lighting you up and energizing you and electrifying you and bringing all this energy into your body and being and beyond. And now exhale any stress and tension. And now let's just gently press our palms together. Softly, softly rub your fingers against your palms and feel how delicious that sensation is. And just allow it to bring you present right here, right now, and bring us together. Welcome, welcome. And good morning, Rosalind. Great to have you here and great to be here with all of you. So we talked about self-assessment yesterday, and today we're talking about perspective, because I actually had occasion to have a chat with a client who was going through some rather harsh evaluations of their patterns and behaviors. Hello, Irma. Welcome, welcome. So great to have you here. So we're talking about turning the light of awareness on our own behaviors, and then getting to choose how, or becoming aware and conscious of how we interact with that awareness. Because when we see elements of ourselves or behaviors that we've done that we are not, that it isn't our preferred way of being, we often tend to magnify these things and to identify with them in such a way that they become our whole self-perception. And we blow things up out of proportion, for instance. So if I say something harsh to somebody, I might be beating myself up about that for an extended period of time. And that becomes my primary focus and my primary awareness of who I am and how I interact with the world. And I just want to call that out as simply untrue. That first of all, we are not our behaviors. We have, or we do our behaviors, but it's not who we are. And so when we have a behavior or a reaction that is not indicative of our highest expression, we get to be conscious of not generalizing that into an experience of the entirety of ourselves. So it doesn't mean because I acted in a way that I don't prefer, that I maybe spoke a harsh word, it doesn't mean that that is who I am. It means that that is something I did. And when we can make that distinction and gain that perspective, then we have the ability to take action regarding that response, right? So if there was a harsh word spoken and we feel bad about that, or we feel that it's not an indicator of who we prefer to be, then we get to speak into that with the person to whom we had the harsh word, if we choose, you know. So when we recognize that we are not our behavior, we are not our emotions, we are not our reactions, those are behaviors, emotions, and reactions that we have, that we experience. And we do have the ability to step back and have perspective on those things or those patterns as something that we're related to, but they are not us and they are not the entirety of us. So I know years ago when I did something that I wasn't pleased with, I wasn't proud of, or welcome, Julie. Great to see you here. Then I could be beating myself up over that for days and days and days, and really focusing on how terrible it was, or whether it was terrible or not. These things, we magnify them in our own experience, and then we use those things to attack ourselves or create or criticize ourselves or limit ourselves. And what happens is that we've got this intense focus on a negative experience and forget about the rest of how we express in the world. And the thing is that these negative moments often have more impact, not only for others, but for ourselves. Good morning, Tammy. Welcome. Great to have you guys here. Um, these things leave a bigger mark for people and for ourselves than perhaps they should in the scheme of things, right? One misstep can resound more loudly than hundreds of steps that are in line or that are in grace. So the thing is that when we observe these things about ourselves, one of the things that's really profoundly important in gaining this perspective is allowing ourselves to be human beings and to find forgiveness and compassion for ourselves in these contexts. And from that place, we can look at the bigger picture. And maybe even without forgiveness, hopefully you can bring yourself to be able to look at the bigger picture and recognize that this behavior is an aberration rather than a representation. And so I think that the pain of seeing ourselves in these moments of less than optimal performance, shall we say, these moments can be very sobering and humbling. And the pain of those experiences can catapult us into making different choices in the future, into making adjustments of our behavior. However, I think that sometimes we just get carried away in the self-beratement of it, in just being our own worst critics, where others around us who know us can be more forgiving, and they have a broader perspective on who we are and what our experience is. And so it's interesting because we don't often, when we do something wonderful, we don't often celebrate ourselves in the same way that we will criticize ourselves when we do something that we don't approve of in the same way. So I don't know, do you have an experience with this where you're much more inclined to be self-critical ongoingly than self-affirming? And I'm not saying that we get to that it's better to get all carried away with ourselves when we do something wonderful, but we should, there's the word should, we have the ability to acknowledge the things that we do that are wonderful and acknowledge the things that we do that we're perceiving as terrible. And we get to know that we are not those things. We are more than those things. So, and we are more than our feelings. We are more than sadness. We are more than happiness. We are more than anxiety. We are more than depression. We are more uh, than our humor. You know, we're more than our talents. And maybe we could say we are love ultimately. And maybe that's an umbrella we can live under. And if we choose to embrace that identity, then it can contextualize our response to all these other aspects of experience that we have. So if I can keep coming back to I am love, what does that mean? Well, how does that show up? How can we interact with that as a working hypothesis? How can we manifest that in our experience with ourselves and with others? What would that look like? And how can that heal the injury that we inflict on ourselves and sometimes others in our reactions to things? I think there are two pathways that I experience as the most powerful to connection with that sense of love and presence and connection is beauty and gratitude, both. And gratitude, another way to think about gratitude is appreciation, because gratitude sometimes is saying thank you to something else, whereas appreciation is being present to the experience of appreciation. Gratitude. So Irma says acceptance and surrender. Yes, yes. So the thing that I keep looking at is expansiveness. So with acceptance, sometimes acceptance can feel like resignation, and the same thing with surrender can feel like resignation. And I think that there's another side to that that is hugely expansive. And when we've talked about a Western mind versus an Eastern mind, and how we're Westerners, and the idea of letting go is kind of counter to our social and cultural conditioning, where we're really more acquisitional. So a road to acceptance rather than letting go is by expanding to include the thing that we're looking to accept, whether it's ourselves or others. We can expand to include our rage, and expand to include our anxiety, rather than trying to let go of it or deny it, or or instead of reacting to it. One of the things that we can do is expand to include it. And by doing that, it's going back to what we were saying earlier. We're not our behaviors. When we expand to include something, that's a part, it's an aspect of us. So the acceptance is accepting that I can expand to include all these portions of myself that I have been judging as negative, and I can expand to include my judgment, and I can expand to include my love, and I can expand to include my gratitude and appreciation. And just to go back around to where I was going before with gratitude or acceptance and beauty. When I have an experience of beauty, and I've seen this written, and I couldn't quote it accurately, but essentially that beauty is a pathway to God, or a pathway to a connection with the divine and universal. Because I think beauty transcends the mind and can go right to the heart. Good morning, Pat. Welcome to, actually, I think I didn't see you before. Welcome, welcome. I'm really glad to have you here and joining us all. So we're talking about perspective, and particularly in the realm of self-awareness and self-assessment, and how we often can be particularly harsh with our assessments of ourselves, and then expand that notion of judgment, or expand that conversation and perspective, so that it kind of obliterates any other awareness. And by recognizing that our behaviors are a portion of our expression, that we are not the behaviors, nor are we any of these other things, but we encompass all of them, that we can expand to include all of them. Ultimately, what happens as the result of this expansion is, if I am you, and you are me, and I am anger and shadow and light and darkness and joy and love, and I am all these things and more, the experience is ultimately that I am presence. So we could let go of everything and get to that nothingness that is I am presence. Or we could expand to include everything, which is ultimately that everythingness that is presence. And the quality of the everythingness and the nothingness that is presence is ultimately just presence. There's no nothing and there's no everything. And I don't know if I'm getting too esoteric here or not, but I think that that's what we get to look at. This is how we can gain perspective and move toward a greater presence and consciousness that is inclusive, because we are I want to say the sum total of, but that's not true. We're beyond the sum total of all our perceptions and all our experience and all our knowledge. We are more. We are the consciousness behind all of that, and behind the awareness of the world. So this conversation is really kind of running the gamut, isn't it? From self-awareness to universal consciousness. And it's all in the perspective that we take. When the idea of expanding to include these elements of ourselves, and to recognize that they are fractional expressions of who we are, is something that can move us into a place of expansive acceptance. And it's funny, Irma, you say surrender. I have a button that the word surrender pushes for me, because when I was growing up, I got to see The Wizard of Oz every year for years and years while I was a kid. And it was on TV, and it was a very visceral experience. At that time, we didn't have anywhere near the amount of digital input that we have these days. And so one of the scenes, if you're not familiar with The Wizard of Oz, it's really quite a magical story. And it is very much about coming up against our self-perceptions and limitations, and moving beyond them. But there's a wicked witch in the movie who is chasing, and they're good witches too, by the way, who is chasing Dorothy down. Dorothy is the main character, and she's this young girl who is going on a very profound journey into self-awareness. And anyway, so this witch is hunting Dorothy down, and one of the lines in the movie is "Surrender, Dorothy." And so I as many years now as it is later from the time that I grew up with this movie in my mind, when I hear the word surrender, I'm thinking of the Wicked Witch chasing down Dorothy and calling for her surrender. So for me, the expand to include it is a form of expansive surrender. You know, it's surrendering our limitations. And I kind of that's something that I can live with more easily, that feels better for my aesthetic, is to surrender our limitations. And that's really what we're talking about here. So Irma says, I have I have something with that word too. I'm not sure what you're saying, but you have some stuff going on around that word surrender. I do too. You know, it's like surrender still, uh, in many ways, rebeldy. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'm not sure what you mean by that word, Irma, but I'm guessing that you have some issues with the word. In any case, you know, surrender for me is associated with give up, and rather than something expansive, um, it feels not expansive. It feels like well, like giving up. And it's funny. Oh, rebellious. Okay, gotcha. Rebellion. Okay. So you rebel against that word too. I not the best word for me, but I like the concept of being able to expand my heart into fuller and fuller consciousness and awareness, and a fuller experience of encompassing all of it. And so the irony is, or the paradox is, that through that expansion, as we expand into being all things, then ultimately we are accomplishing the same result as surrender, right? As giving over our individual identity, right? Because what happens is we expand our identity to include all of it. And so then we are not identified with any of it. And so I guess we can get there any number of different ways, right? Um, I think it's interesting. You know, we can go out and beyond and beyond and beyond. Good morning, Danette. Welcome, welcome. So as we go out beyond and beyond and beyond and beyond, we're expanding into everything. As we go in deeper, 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 everything sort of disappears to come into this expansive. When we do go deeper and deeper and deeper, what we finally come to is everything. You know, expanding beyond the the limit into the infinity, into the infinitude that we are. So I love that that the opposites become the same somehow. You know, if we expand into the infinite light, then that is a nothingness. If we expand into infinite dark, it is a nothingness and an everythingness, right? And I wonder, you know, into if we expand, if there is just this void, you know, this black space that we expand into. Boy, I'm really getting esoteric today, huh? But if we expand into this endless black space, then it isn't black, because it is just what it is. And the same thing with an infinite light. it's not light because it's all there is. So we only have light and darkness in contrast to one another, just like surrender versus expansion, and obviously you're hearing my bias because I hear surrender as a contractive sort of thing, whereas people experience the expanding of the heart, the opening of the heart through divine surrender. So I'm curious, do I have your head spinning? Because mine's kind of a little foggy from all of this, just looking at the connection between all of it, moving into this space. Wow, I just felt this wave of emotion just sort of rise in this, that there's this place of connection to the universal that emanates from our heart. And it doesn't really matter how we get there, right? It doesn't matter whether we get there from being all or being nothing, or from going outward or coming inward, or surrendering or expanding. It doesn't matter how we get there, but we do have the ability to presence ourselves to this infinite energy, this the force of life itself, or the force of consciousness itself. And the response that's arising in me is a sense of awe and wonder. And I don't know if you can feel it, but yeah, I'm feeling just this tremendous sense of awe that we have as available to us, that just arises as a primal experience when we can presence ourselves to the magnificence of consciousness itself, and maybe this presence of energy that we could maybe call love, or we could call it life expressing itself, or we could call it beauty, or we could call it God, or whatever it is that calls to you as this sense of awe just rises and expands. So perspective, I guess we're talking about perspectives, and for me, one of the most enriching is with every perspective to be able in some way to expand, to include it, rather than reject it or resist it. To expand, to include it doesn't mean we have to agree, but we can expand to include it. And in these fractious times, when we have so much healing to do, maybe we can expand to include other people's points of view. And we can expand to include that we are not our behaviors and our actions, but that we are so much more. So with that, I'm going to call it a day. We ran through the paces today, I think. Anyway, I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I am here going live on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page every weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. It is my deep pleasure and privilege to spend this time with you daily. And I'm so grateful for this time that we spend together. So be aware today of your perspective, and maybe you can expand it to include even more and more love. Lots and lots of love to you all. Thanks for joining me. Take care.